says that we can understand that everything, the all, is going to have some of the same things. It's going to be new. It's going to be temporary. It has no essence. It's all now, not only what we see, but even what we don't see, we can feel that the experience tells us that we can predict that it too will, whatever that is, will obey the same rules. Meditation prepares us for it. So it's predictive. That's what science always wants. In other words, science wants to say, if I shoot this ray of light into the vacuum, I want to predict, I want to get to the place where I can absolutely predict what it's going to do. If I can't predict what it's going to do, I have to do more and more research, because if I can't predict, it means I've got to run my experiments over and over and over until I can be assured down to the where if I can predict it, it's going to happen. In meditation, I think it's the same thing. That you want to feel that what you will be doing in the meditation is predictive. And when you read the Buddhist text, I think they are predictive. They are saying, in essence, if you can do this, we predict that the following will happen to you. Because that's what's happened to all those who have cleared the vacuum and done the practice. They get it, and they get it over and over, and it's always there for them. I remember that once, again, sort of in Korea, one of the monks that I met and worked and studied him in a way, he told me when he first started to meditate, he said he was a good meditator. In fact, he meditated so much that he had calluses on the side of his feet from having them folded over. And a lot of meditators do that. They actually get calluses on the sides of their feet because that's where the pressure is. They're not walking, they're sitting in meditation. And yet, every time he got up from meditation, he would lose it. He would be in a state of almost bliss, and then it was, they rang the bell, or they said time to eat, or whatever, and it just, the vacuum filled up with all the debris again. He couldn't keep it out. It was porous in a way. And I certainly remember the first time I tried to do Buddhist meditation. It was in downtown Los Angeles on 3rd Street, and I lived out at Silver Lake. I was going to USC, so we'd meditate 45 minutes, and then have a little lesson, and we'd meditate another 45 minutes, and at the end of it, you felt just great. And I drove home on the freeway. It was all gone. I could never get it home. I tried my best to get home with it. I never did. I was not experienced enough. My experience was too porous. The traffic and the honking and road rage, it all came in. And so by the time I got home, I'd lost it all. So I was very aware of the porousness of it. This monk in Korea said, one day there came a time when he realized that he didn't lose it. He got up from his mat. It was snowing. He walked out into the snow, and it was with him. He had it. It was a vacuum held, so to speak. He could, from that point on, have that experience without losing or without the permeation. And that you we all have some experiences like this. If you study a language, you know that for certain words, there comes a moment where you'll never forget it. The other words, particularly those that are going to be on the test, you always forget. But some word will stick and you know you've got it for life. It's just going to be with you. It's not permeable to being lost. And that's what I felt that he was saying, is he could hold on to his state of bliss all the time, which would be incredible. Not anything I've experienced or ever will, but for him, I could see that he could feel that. So consciousness arises again for us. We are still struggling with consciousness. Descartes, with his famous thing, said, "I think." And then he said, "Ergo, therefore, I am." But as one scholar has once said, one day in one of his writings, Descartes did say, or a question came up to, what if you don't think? Do you exist? But he decided not to go there. That was too fraught with problems. If I only exist when I think, then if I'm not thinking, it was like the emptiness of not thinking was still a bit terrifying to Descartes, as it was to many people in Europe. The vacuum or the nothingness was something which they could not easily culturally acquire, because they were being taught the opposite. That vacuum is evil almost. So nowadays we're asking the question, many questions about consciousness. When did consciousness arise? When was the first time that there was consciousness? And nowadays they finally are beginning to say, maybe even at the first single cell creatures, there was a type of consciousness that we see in animals now. Consciousness. People are willing to say animals have cognition. People are even beginning to say, maybe plants have it. And beyond that, maybe inanimate objects like minerals have it. Why? Because it goes over into causation. That we are beginning to understand the nature of consciousness in a much broader way. What happens when a plant is being attacked by another plant and it emits an odor which attracts a predator for that other plant? What is that? That happens. They have proof of this. So what is it? Is that consciousness? Is that a type of consciousness? People are now beginning to ask such questions. So, when does consciousness arise? And somebody has said, well, if you look at the most primitive of life form, where there is some kind of symmetry, where things line up in a circle, where there are little projections, is that consciousness that would have produced that? Why does that develop? If we begin to deal with consciousness at this level, then it says, is consciousness unseen? It's beyond our sight. Is that why we can't ever come to a conclusion about it? One of the biggest fights that's going on now is about quantum consciousness. That's because the Institute for Consciousness in Arizona has come up with their research findings where they say they think that the brain is the only example of quantum physics at room temperature. And that the brain, for example, will receive information, it passes it back to the past, it projects it back onto something that happened already, and then it presents to us a picture of it all happens simultaneously now. And that's considered a quantum process where time can be either past, present, or future, and it is interactive. As we're saying, not everybody agrees. Victor Stinger is a physicist. He rejects quantum consciousness with bitter and long articles, and with he's also convincing. Both are convincing in one sense. The debate between them is really fierce. So whenever there are these consciousness conferences, and there are many, they don't invite Victor, I think, to come. He causes them a lot of anguish. But a lot of people are now saying that as they look at science and what's going to happen, they really believe that consciousness study will probably be the most important study of the next century. That it will not be material culture as it has been in the past, or atoms, or all of that, but that what's coming at us is with all the activities with brain studies, consciousness is going to really rear its head, and we're going to want to know what is consciousness. What is it? Because it's us. It's what we're having every day. Why can't we somehow understand what's going on with this thing? What is it, and when is it? What's the nature of it? So that, is it quantum? Can it reverse itself? Is it just the senses? Is it something which is beyond what I can see, what I can deal with? These are the big questions that are coming to the fore. So that's why the current research, we talked about this a little bit before, when we see our opponent come forward and hit the ball with their racket, the brain has already processed it, and before we can have conscious conception, our arm is moving. In other words, consciousness is at a level which we never thought before. It is consciousness that doesn't have to have the words in our head, I must now swing the bat or the racket. And by the time you get to that level, it's too late. The ball is already past you. So that consciousness that we don't see, or in the sense that before we see something, before we're seeing it even, the consciousness is functioning. And that seeing is when the brain is cognizing it. But we already have something we can't see, but it's, in one sense, it's working very well. So when I read all the stuff on consciousness, and this is why it's so difficult to give this lecture, they said, consciousness is 8 neuroscientists, they all got together. They said, all right, let's come up with a definition of consciousness. So I'm sure they got a big grant to do this. They probably all went to Hawaii to have their meetings. I'm probably maligning them, so don't quote me. They came up with this statement: consciousness has not yet become a scientific term. that can be defined in this way. Currently, we all use the term consciousness in many different and often ambiguous ways. In other words, gang, we can't tell you what it means. We aren't there. We don't know how to define this word from the neuroscientific method. Well, I'm glad when scientists are willing, as we all have to be, to admit what we don't know. We simply have not reached the state where we can know it. But if this is where we are in terms of the state of our knowledge, given our knowledge in so many other areas, isn't this an amazing statement? And these are the top neuroscientists who are making it. This is not somebody like myself off the street who said, I don't know. My granddaughter's reached a stage where she shrugs, she doesn't know anything, so I've got to do it too. That's an easy way out. These guys can't be that way. This is their job. This is what they're supposed to know. And I sympathize with them. I understand why they're saying, we simply do not know what this consciousness is. It's a term which is being used in all sorts of ways. Who will define it? Who's going to bring it down to something which they will agree upon? And will there be evidence that what they suggest is actually provable and predictable and will work over and over and over? So when we talk about what we are putting on the Buddhist teaching, the sake of the Buddhist teaching, we want you to tell us exactly what consciousness is. We want you to tell us exactly how to use it. We want you to tell us exactly how it functions. It's a big order for anybody. It's a very big order. Now, the Buddhists had a lot to say. We need to explore what they had to say. Science has begun to recognize they may be better listen to some of the other traditions of the world that have said something about this, that have some experience with observations, and I hope they will. I believe that the Buddhists should be heard in this debate and be fully understood. It can't be done just with the usual introductory volume about Buddhism. Buddhists have spoken about these things in great detail. And how can we bring that forward in a way which makes it more than that we're new agey, we're coming up with new stuff and listen to us? And science will do it. They will not listen to this, nor should they. We need to come at it with a very clear and precise definition and explanation of what the tradition said. And some people are beginning to do that. The books are dense, they are hard to read. It is not for everybody. If you want to use a book to put you to sleep at night, I mean, these books about consciousness can probably drive you into unconsciousness very fast. So, feel free to read them from that perspective. I like Paul Grabstein very much, because basically what he says is it's very hard to ever decide what truth is. It's very hard to decide whether we really have it right or not. But he said, the only thing we should do is to say, we ought to get things less wrong. That's all we can hope for. Every time we do the experiment, every time we try to think about it, we should get it less wrong. It doesn't say we got it right. That you don't ask for. That's too much. And it's like consciousness. We ought to begin to talk about consciousness and hope that every time we talk about it, we get it a little less wrong. And if we get it a little less wrong, then we should pat ourselves on the back and say, that may be as much as we can possibly hope for in this present time. So we're back to the sensorium. We are trying to decide how this combination of all of these issues we can deal with them. We're asking ourselves, if that's empty, is consciousness empty? Is consciousness something we can see? Is consciousness something we can experience as another thing? Or is it something quite different? So that's why I wanted to give this lecture and following the other to say, just like with a vacuum, if you make a vacuum, it has form. Because in order to make a vacuum, you have to have a wall that contains it. And the vacuum and the wall are together. And you can't have the vacuum without that container. So that the form of this emptiness surrounds it. So I think what the Buddha said about this emptiness and form as emptiness, these are really profound statements. We ought to study them quite carefully and hope that as we do, maybe we can get a little less wrong. Thank you very much.